All right, well, this seems good. I'm still, if you see my face looking down at my phone, I'm not being rude. I'm just answering emails in case people are trying to get in and they haven't been able to. Um, so please ignore that. Hopefully, it'll happen while Ashlyn is talking and no one will notice. Um, but I'm going to start with some housekeeping tonight. So, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lynne Calamia, and I'm the executive director at Roebling Museum. And because I'm the executive director, of course, I'll recommend that everyone who's here to learn about our artist in residence program, you should visit our website and check out our membership options as another way to support the museum. Being a member at Roebling Museum is the new hot thing to do, and you should all do it. But while you're there, you could also sign up for our newsletter so that you don't miss any other announcements about our programs and events. We have our amazing Murder and Mayhem tour coming up, and I think you should buy tickets for that. It's a true crime walking tour, and it's October, so it really is, 'tis the season. So I'm looking now at our attendee list, and I can see many of you guys are from out of town. So for those of you who haven't visited our museum yet, we are located in the former company town of Roebling, New Jersey, which is in central New Jersey, right on the Delaware River. Our company town, it's a historic district listed on the National Register. It was built in 1905, and it remains almost fully intact architecturally. I usually say about 98%. One building burned down and one was moved. So when you're walking through town, it really feels the way it felt back then. Our museum is on the site of the former Roebling steel and wire rope mill that produced the materials needed to build some of the United States' most iconic suspension bridges. We have both indoor and outdoor exhibits and programs that really bring to life the story of the people who lived and worked in the company town. And again, we offer some really great walking tours. I'm saying that because I lead the tours on Saturdays, but also, again, we have specialty themed tours. We did one on bricks. We're doing a true crime tour coming up. So definitely pay attention and stop by because they're a lot of fun. But today we're going to be talking about something else that we are super excited about, and that's our first ever Artist in Residence program. So we're really excited to share more about the project with you tonight. The project was funded by a Burlington County local arts grant, and we've applied again for the next round and hope that we can bring even more art to the museum moving forward. So really quick, the way the program tonight is going to run, our guest Ashlyn will give a presentation about her project, which is up in the steel mill right now. You can go see it. Wait until the morning because it's going to be pretty dark out there tonight. But while she's talking, you can submit questions in the Q&A section underneath. I will manage the questions and the chat. So then when it's time for the question and answers, we'll have some ready for her and we can have a nice conversation. So Ashlyn, are you ready to take over? Get started?
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for virtually attending this evening. My name is Aislinn Pentecost-Farren, and I've been the artist in residence at Roebling this year. I'm an artist and a public historian, and I make sculptures and public art projects that are inspired by histories of places, artifacts, and land. So for the last 2 years, I've been creating art that tries to reckon with the climate impacts and the honorable legacies of America's industrial heritage. I finished this artwork at the Roebling Museum last week, and it's called Sunset. Sunset refers to the closure of the Roebling Mill, which was 50 years ago last month. And it also refers to the color gradient of molten steel. And it also refers to the dwindling of the fossil fuels that powered the mill. The length of each of the banners corresponds with the carbon in the atmosphere every 3 years from the mill's founding in 1905 to when it closed in 1974. So I'm going to talk more about that project. But first, I'm going to talk about my background working with museums, share some of my previous work, talk about why I was interested in working with the Roebling Museum. And then I'm going to talk about how I came up with this particular project and what the process of creating it was like and what it has meant to me. And I'm excited to hear your questions and talk together as much as we're able in this format. So please, you can pop them in the Q&A as we're going, or you can save them to the end. But Lynne is gonna pass them along to me as once we get to the Q&A. Like I said, I've worked for a long time with museums and historic sites on artistic projects. These are some of the sites I've worked with, mostly I'm based in Philadelphia, and so a lot of my work has been based in Philadelphia. On the upper left is Glen Ford Mansion, also on the Delaware, like Roebling. The Fairmount Waterworks, that's on the Schuylkill, Bartram's Garden, and then the Lazaretto. And those are just some of the places I've been, had the privilege of sort of working with their history to come up with a sort of creative response. I'm going to talk about a couple of those projects. So one thing about my art practice is I start with the ideas and the history and sort of go from there. I don't come in with a predetermined medium. So I'm not always making things out of fabric like I did for this project. I sort of let the medium emerge from what I'm interested in sort of highlighting about the topic. So you're going to see that in these example projects. The medium is kind of all over the place. At the Lazaretto, this is America's oldest quarantine station. After the yellow fever epidemics in Philadelphia in the late 1700s, they built a quarantine station that stopped every ship that came into the city and checked the passengers and the cargo for illness. And I actually made this project the year before the COVID-19 pandemic, which was a very weird coincidence, but it's a retelling of the history, sort of like a walking tour, but it's for two people to listen to at once. It's an audio guide. Each person has a different but related audio track that guides them through the space to sort of enact some of the history together. So it's both a tour and a performance you do for your buddy. So that's at the Lazaretto, and it's up on my website. It's free if you ever want to check it out. This is a project that I did with a Greenway organization in Philadelphia called Riverfront North. And the place in question wasn't a museum in this case. It was an empty lot that used to be a concrete factory, but they're gonna turn it into a park. It's now being turned into a park. And I interviewed people that lived in that neighborhood about the history of the park and the river, or the history of the concrete factory and the river, and their kind of memories of that area, and then printed them on a pizza box that was distributed by a local pizza restaurant in the neighborhood. And this project happened during COVID, and I designed it this way because this was sort of the only way that people could connect or that anything was circulating was through takeout food. And this became kind of a surprise art project that people received whenever they ordered a pizza from this restaurant. And then the project I did at Glen Ford, this was actually the first project I did about climate. This is an industrialist's mansion in the far, far northeast corner of Philadelphia. And it's right on the Delaware, and there's beautiful stone staircase that goes down to the river. And I designed a project where I turned the staircase into a kind of measuring device for sea level rise. So the Delaware is tidal. It goes up and down with the level of the ocean. It's close enough to the ocean. And I marked each stair with the name of the neighborhood, the Philadelphia neighborhood, at the level at which it would be underwater. So sort of the same elevation that neighborhood is at. That's sort of the stair that I labeled with its name. So you can kind of get a sense of sort of the loss that could happen as the sea level changes in the Philadelphia area. This began a new direction in my work where I started thinking about how much in sort of climate research, climate scientists, are talking about history. So they're talking about the industrial period as this turning point that really was the beginning of all of this change in our atmosphere. And climate scientists don't really kind of then go into it in any more detail. Like, they're not talking about exactly what fuel or sort of what the social consequences were or what the motivations were. They're just sort of stating the Industrial Revolution as fact. That's kind of the background and the cause for sort of what is catalyzing the beginning of the climate crisis. But I was really interested, and I am really interested in connecting that climate science to the very sort of concrete and human history that was happening at that time. So I started looking for historic sites that were telling that story, sort of like industrial era historic sites that were talking about how they had a connection to this climate issue that we're now kind of experiencing. And luckily, a ton of historic sites that are connected to this history exist. We're really good at preserving industrial history. And here's a bunch of sites that are related to it. So in the top left, this is Iron Bridge Gorge, which is actually in England. It's known as the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. There's on the lower left, Lowell Mills, one of I think the biggest dedicated textile mill town in the northeastern US, ran on coal as well as water power. And then the lower right is the Elms, which is a really popular tourist destination. It's a super fancy mansion, and it was built by the man who owned the majority of coal land in Pennsylvania, and built with that money. So this is definitely a history that we've preserved, but I didn't find that anyone was really talking about climate at any of these places. At this point, all of these places are starting to plan to talk about it, but it's kind of in the nascent stages. And so I wanted to start doing art projects that explore this and provide a way for historic sites to sort of dip their toe in the water on a new topic without maybe committing a whole exhibition or a whole new kind of interpretive direction. I'll just skip through that, sorry. So I'm going to show you a few of my projects that I've done trying to connect the sort of the science and the data essentially about climate change with these cultural institutions, history, and art. This is a project that is a tour of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where I tell the history of the climate crisis through artifacts that are on display in their museum. So it started on the left. I'm hoping you guys have the same left and right that I do, but on the left, the first version of this project was a brochure that I made, and I designed it to look exactly like their sort of map guide. And each page shows an artifact and tells you which gallery to find it in, and then tells you the sort of piece of climate history that artifact is part of. And this was a little bit of a guerrilla art project. I emailed the museum. I knew some people that knew some people, and I emailed them and asked if they'd like to work together or, you know, use the map or use the guide, and I didn't get any response. So actually, I snuck it into the museum on one of their free Saturdays. So the top image is a stack of them that I put in the sort of box at the front door. And you can see my map is the one with the purple Monet on the left. And the museum's real map is the one on the right. And that Monet is on the front because Monet was obsessed with painting in London because he really liked the effect that the fog had on the light. And that fog was actually coal smoke. So what his really famous series of paintings he made in London, what it actually documents is the effects of the industrial revolution. So, and then finally, I met someone who, a friend of mine, Daniel Tucker, knew someone else at the museum. They hadn't actually seen my sneaky project. They were really interested in the idea though, and they invited me to give some official in-person tours. So that's ongoing. I'm working with the education department now to do some climate history education with them. This is another project. I'll try to go a little bit more quickly through these old projects. This is called Golden Spike 24 Places. And I took 12 plates that commemorate America's industrial history that are sort of these commemoration plates, like for company anniversaries or like the first train west of the Mississippi, things like that, these really beautiful commemorative plates. And I made a kind of companion series of plates that were molded from the commemorative plates that document the efforts of geologists to sort of recognize the climate crisis. And this is one of my few projects that wasn't with a particular museum. I just made this work because I wanted to, and a gallery ended up showing it. So, yeah, some ceramics work. But I really do like working with fabric. This is one of my favorite fabric works I've made so far. It's called Excavated Monument, excuse me. This is a black velvet slipcover that I sewed for a 54-foot obelisk of coal that was shown at the Chicago World's Fair. And it was shipped there by Pennsylvania. It was for kind of boostering Pennsylvania's coal industry and showing off how awesome we were at providing coal to the Industrial Revolution. And so I sewed it a slipcover, and I made it to scale. It's 10 feet on each side and 54 feet long. And I show it on a low platform as if the obelisk has collapsed and the slipcover has just kind of folded in on itself. And nearby on another pedestal, I show a catalog from the World's Fair that has this image of the obelisk. And to me, this piece is about sort of creating an object that can hold the what I kind of would consider the emotional weight we have in hindsight now from understanding what this coal's effect in the atmosphere is. So this is why I was really excited to work with the Roebling Museum. I was really interested in industrial history, and besides Glen Ford, which is, you know, an industrialist mansion, I hadn't really worked with an industrial history museum on an art project before. If you're not from Roebling or in that area, or you haven't been, this is a little bit of what the museum looks like. the main exhibits, the indoor exhibits, are inside the old gatehouse of the museum. And then out in the what they call the mill yard, they have preserved some incredible pieces of the infrastructure of the factory. This is a big flywheel that was part of a steam engine that burned coal. And then in the background, you can see this sort of long elevated rail that was part of a crane that moved scrap metal around that they made the wire out of. Inside, there's some really cool exhibitions. Some of them are about the workers, and this one is about building the Brooklyn Bridge, which Roebling designed, and they made the wire. And as Lynn was saying, the museum is in this beautiful, beautiful little town that the Roeblings built for their workers to live in. All this land was a farm, and the Roeblings built the mill and the town kind of from the ground up, which is why the brick tour is going to be really interesting. All of this was built with local brick. Anyway, could learn out about that, but I'm not going to. So essentially, I'm interested in just kind of putting together the graphs like this that we, we're starting to see in the news and we're starting to be a little familiar with. This is scientific data, but it's also, there's a timeline at the bottom. Like this is a history. And so we can do even just kind of a simple visualization like this, I think makes a big difference. Looking at the gray line is yearly emissions, and then the blue line is total atmospheric carbon. And so you can kind of see John Roebling's factory was, his first factory he built, before emissions had really accelerated. But by the time the one, this one in what is now Roebling, it was built in 1905. It's part of kind of a growing change in how we create power, and therefore how what's in the atmosphere. And then by the time the mill closes in 1974, emissions are much, much higher. And the power that the mill used was part of that. It was there was a coal power plant on site. They burned oil. There's fuel oil on site. I used a variety of fossil fuel power methods. So it was, wasn't using the river for power. It wasn't using windmills. This was, like any factory of its day, was using a lot of fossil fuels. So I'm just interested in kind of putting this history together with the science so that we now know, and seeing what resonates. This is a aerial view of the museum today and the former Roebling site. So the gatehouse is in the and the indoor exhibitions and everything is on the left side, and then the old factory used to extend all the way where the kind of grass is more gray. The factory was covered that whole area, but everything's been demolished because it was a Superfund site after it closed down and had to be remediated. So the part that the museum's on is safe for people. The part that's still the part that's gray is still off limits. But you can see here again the giant flywheel and this amazing craneway that was used to move scrap metal around. I got really interested in this craneway. I didn't know what I would make when I started as an artist in residence at Roebling. And that's a really cool thing about a residency instead of sort of, I guess, a commission, is that Lynne was really open to me just coming and being on site for a while, getting to know the history, getting to know the artifacts, and then coming up with a project. So that requires a lot of trust. And I don't take that for granted. I really, I think Lynne's amazing. And I convinced her that I would definitely do something cool. I just didn't know what. So I spent the first few months visiting Roebling many times, reading things Lynne gave me. I spent time in the exhibitions. I spent time in the collection where the artifacts are. And I kept coming back to this craneway. I think partly because it is huge. It's the biggest thing on site, but it kind of, in a way, it fades into the background because it's sort of just a frame for something else, is kind of how it felt to me. And the more I started thinking about it, the more, um, to me, it is like almost a timeline, or the frame for a timeline. Like each of the gaps is exactly the same, and it just kind of goes marching on and on and on. So I started to think about um, time, and I've in my work, I'm constantly looking at graphs that are also timelines of either emissions or changes in um, different kinds of fuel usage, and looking at, on the bottom left, like how different types of fuel use accelerate and others decelerate. So I just started thinking, okay, how can I tie this to this site? How can I tie this sort of information and reflection we have now um, to this place, and in a way that's meaningful, and um, not just printing this on a big piece of paper or something. Um, so I started to think about the timeline, and yeah, and even thinking of the Craneway almost as a film strip, and like each of those bays as a moment, um, and playing with the color that the colors that would have been kind of in the crucible at the furnace. Um, and these are just sort of watercolor sketches I did. Started thinking about and so I started thinking about fabric, and how could I um, break up a picture into frames, kind of using the bay as sort of these frames. Um, but then I needed to get a little practical, so doing these like pretty paint pictures, but how am I actually going to do this? And when I do fabric work, I really like to use dead stock fabric, which means fabric that has been sort of almost thrown away, but sort of rescued at the end for resale. So companies will buy, they'll plan some project, they need, a bajillion bolts of fabric, and then they buy maybe 10 or 15% extra in case anything goes wrong. They don't use that 10 or 15%, then they don't need it, and they kind of offload it. They might throw it away, but um, there are facilities that kind of rescue it. And so I like to use this kind of fabric, because then I'm not contributing as much to demand for material. So it feels like a way to be a little more eco-friendly with my work. So, but it restricts what's available. So I went to my source, which is this place called Jomar in North Philly. It's really amazing. Albert will help you if you ever want to go there. They don't have industrial fabrics or ripstop fabrics. They mostly have garment dead stock. And I wanted something that could somehow withstand weather, and not stretch or get discolored, but something really vibrant, and something celebratory, because I wanted this project to hold all the pride and kind of the way that the Roebling mill is still kind of honored and remembered by the community that descended from the workers. So I found a bunch of satin, and I was just struck by how beautiful it is. It's luminous. It almost has like its own glow. And luckily, they had some of the golds and reds and things that I had been playing with my watercolors. But they had them in weird and limited amounts, and they didn't have everything, so I couldn't pick any color I wanted. So I started doing more sketches with the fabric that I was able to find, um, and trying to figure out how I could um, embody this sort of this data as kind of emissions changed, as well as the fire and the spirit of the mill itself. So I came upon this idea of making it somehow a sunset, because that felt like a nod to the anniversary of the closing and a nod to the end of using the fossil fuels that the mill used. So here's just more of my concept sketches. Um, Eventually, I pulled data from Mauna Loa, which is where this is the place in Hawaii where they take the official atmospheric carbon measurements every year. And I put it into Excel and then arranged it a little bit more like the crane way and put in the colors I wanted. So this is the sketch that I actually made the piece from. It was an Excel sketch. And the green and purple at the bottom of some of them are, that was actually just how I was tracking what I had done on each of these banners, sort of as I cut and sewed them. It's kind of crazy I find as a project grows in scale, like literally how big it is, it becomes, as I move into production, it becomes a matter of like material management, and it feels less like I'm using my like creative brain sometimes, and more like I'm using my math brain again. So that was kind of cool to be working on a data project and to really be tracking what I was doing in Excel to make it. Then I ran a bunch of tests, and shout out to Pierre Lacombe. He's one of the board members at the Roebling Museum. He has a pickup truck. And shout out to Robin, the accountant and membership manager at Roebling, who with her husband lent us this very tall ladder. I hung several tests on the craneway to try to figure out how I could hang it safely, hang it without it falling down, what would happen with wind, etc. And Pierre did this with me, I think 4 different times. Bless him. One day they would look great. The next day they would get all tangled up, and I realized I needed to tie down the other ends. I really wanted them to be flying free, but not going to work. Tie down the other ends, and then that was too much strain. They would get ripped down by the wind. So I had to do all this research about reinforcing them. Turns out vent holes don't create that much reduction in drag. So it was mainly about strengthening the satin. And then I really went into production mode, and all these little tags are, I was keeping track of all the pieces by labeling them with the year. So all of my studio is covered in satin with blue tape, with 1905, 1947 written on it as I kind of moved these through my sewing machine. Then I installed it with one assistant who's an artist and producer in Philadelphia, Heidi Ratanovich. We organized all the finished banners and mounted them on the craneway using this scissor lift. And that was exciting to get to use that equipment and be up there. Here it is, our last, coming back from installing our last one. And here it is finished. And I was really pleased to notice that because of the way the craneway is oriented, the piece really lights up at sunset. So the satin really catches the rays of the sun as it comes down in the west. I think it's I think it's interesting. I think it's meaningful that it's pretty hard to capture this piece in a photograph, or at least it has been for me. I'm not professional, but at photography, but it's hard to get a sense, really a sense of the scale. And to me, that is um, a really beautiful metaphor about climate change. Like we can hear about something happening and wonder if it has to do with, you know, global warming, or something can happen to us even, and we can kind of have the sense that this is happening, but it's really hard to get a sense of really the whole picture globally at once because it's just such a big um, problem. And I think the scale of the piece um, kind of works with that. um, I also so I start the sh- the early years where the carbon emissions are, or the carbon in the atmosphere is less. Um, I put at the end of the craneway farthest from the museum, and then as you get close to the museum, they get much longer, and that creates this sense of um, kind of compression. The ground is actually rising there, and the craneway is a little bit closer to the ground, and the pieces are also getting longer. And so as you come to this end, as the craneway um, uh, as you walk along the craneway towards the museum, essentially emissions are sort of driving themselves into the ground and into a dead end, which to me is a kind of another metaphor that's in kind of the feeling of the piece, like the physical claustrophobia sort of at that end. Um, but this piece, I think, is also very beautiful. The sunlight on the satin and the just the color, the saturated color that they can get in the satin, which is it's actually a fossil fuel material. It's polyester. It's it's gorgeous, and I think that's really important. This is the 50th anniversary of the mill closing, and it was an extremely important mill in the lives of so many people, the jobs people had, and the people in this mill, worked together to make incredible things happen that had never been done before. And this unified effort and this spirit of doing the impossible is, exactly what we need now um, to solve the climate crisis. So I think these things are all of these things kind of come together in the piece. Um, so yeah, that's this artwork. That's the end of my talk. Thank you for virtually attending, and I'm looking forward to fielding the questions, but I just want to thank a few more folks. I mentioned Pierre Lacombe for making this project possible through all of his testing assistance and also encouragement. Robin, Madison, and Trish at the museum for being an eye on the project, literally texting me the banners are okay, or banners are not okay. Banners came down, and being supportive of all of my efforts. And Lynne, Calamia, um, thank you so much for answering my very random questions and managing the grant and finances of the project, and for trusting me. So thank you so much. I'm excited for the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Ashlyn. One thing that we've noticed, and definitely while I'm talking, if you have questions, type them in the chat or in the Q&A because we want to hear from you guys. But one thing we noticed is the local Facebook group in Roebling went crazy throughout this whole process. So people were looking into the millyard more than ever. I mean, they were trying to find out what on earth those like old scarves were. Like, I think that's what one person referred to it as, because once they get twisted, you really don't know what it is. And so people in town were like going along for the ride for us with us, and really, really curious. And I think that's been um, a really interesting part. Yeah, some people said it looks like Harry Potter's scarf.
Yeah,
It
some
looks
of the
better than
early
that.
tests
Okay, it
definitely
looks
did.
better.
I didn't think of that.
Mhm. All right, I think we have a cue. Here's a cue. Thank you, Ashlyn, for your wonderful presentation. I very much appreciate you speaking equally to the artistic process and the production mechanics, as well as the concept content. Do the colors in the sunset correspond to different types of emissions?
Really good question. No, they don't. And I thought about tying them to different kind of point sources or things like that, but I wanted when I when I sketched that, it didn't look like a sunset. It looked like something else cool, but I really wanted it to have a little bit more of sort of a like shining from a horizon um look. So I ended up not doing that and just having sort of the total length of the banners being sort of total atmospheric carbon for that year. But great question. Um, definitely could have been cool if I could have made that work too.
All right, it turns out the chat is disabled. Thank you, Ryan, for telling me that. So definitely type it into the Q&A. We have another question here. How long will the installation be up?
It's going to be up till almost the end of the month. October 27th will be the last day, which is a Sunday.
And what else is happening towards the end of the month with this project?
Before that, we are going to have a reception and little artist introduction and then sunset tour of the millyard, which is on October 19th, Saturday, October 19th, from 3:30 to 6 p.m. And if it rains, it'll be the next Saturday, but we're aiming for the 19th. So yeah, I would love to see all of you guys in person if you can make it out.
Oh, wait, Ryan asked the same question.
Good question.
But he also said very cool, and I agree with him on that. Another
Thank you.
question that I'm seeing here is, so since you said that you did go through the collection at the museum, was there anything else that caught your eye before you settled on the Craneway? Because I know
Wow.
that Lynne Calamia told you you could do basically whatever you wanted, wherever you wanted. Was there
Not in the
any
queue.
other things?
Um, yeah, I think the hardest part about being an artist in residence at a museum is like there's just so many directions you can go, and it's you have to decide on a project before it's too late to actually do something. And I think I'm getting a little better at that as time goes on. But yeah, early on, I had considered actually the way I met Pierre, the board member that helped with the ladder, was I took one of his geology tours of the river next to the Roebling mill, and we ended up talking about local clays and brick, and I had just done that Golden Spike 24 Places project with all the commemorative plates, and I was like, oh, great, I'll make local clay plates, and I found in the collection some cool ceramics, like there were commemorative plates for some of the Roebling bridges, and there was ceramic plates from that have Roebling logo on
I
them.
think they're from the inn. They have like the
The
logo
inn,
and
okay.
like the
Yeah.
inscription. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, this is, these are some signs I should definitely be doing like another plate project. But I decided not to because the for two reasons. One, the museum is full. There's like, there's not empty gallery space in the Roebling Museum. There's like exhibition everywhere. It's so cool. Even the like screening room where you watch the intro video, the walls are hung floor to ceiling with cool artifacts and art. So, I wanted to do something that didn't move something else out of the way. I wanted to, I don't know, build on what the museum already had, do something that they weren't doing. And there was already a lot to look at inside. So I turned away from that idea because I really wanted to do something outside. And the other reason for that was that I thought it would be better for the museum, and a more interesting for me if anyone who even passed by could see the work and not just people that paid entrance. If Lynne is going to all the trouble of getting this grant and having this artist in residence, how can there be the most mileage and eyes on the project? And I museums can be pretty particular about like what you do on their grounds. And I hadn't met a director before who would even entertain hanging something on an artifact. And but Lynn and I talked several times about the possibility, and I came up with some ways that the only things that are touching the craneway are relatively soft, like wood, rubber. Nothing is I didn't drill into the craneway. I didn't clamp, use any like rough metal clamps on the paint. So we actually figured it out, and I was like, wow, I have to take the opportunity of doing something, something really big, with this amazing outdoor artifact, since I have the chance. That was a really long answer. So,
This one will be shorter. Is
okay.
it difficult to know that your exhibit will be temporary?
Aw, that's a really nice question. Um, yeah, in a way, I think, yeah, I put, months of work into figuring out this project, and it's only up for 3.5
And
weeks.
sewing and like physically putting it
So much
together too.
sewing. Yeah, need a massage. Um, yeah, but um, if this was going to be a permanent artwork, it would have been a completely different project. Um, Fabric installations outside just don't last. Like Christo, a lot of people I've talked to about this project have heard of this artist Christo that covers things in fabric. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't, but his projects are only up for a couple weeks. And he puts years and years and millions of dollars into his fabric projects. So yeah, I did a lot of research onto outdoor fabric pieces, and it's just kind of the way it is with this medium. So I would have had to work in a different it would have been just a completely different idea and project if Lynne had wanted something permanent.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, Ryan said, how are you planning to document? So you said it's really tricky to photograph.
Yeah.
How can we, and I'm saying you, but we, how should we be documenting this?
Yeah. Well, I have a camera that has a wider lens that I'm going to try photographing with. Um, I also know a photographer that her specialty is taking photographs for architects of like
Mm.
big buildings, and and landscape architects of like landscapes and stuff. So I'm going to see if she can fit our budget, and maybe just take a couple snaps that somehow kind of get it all in one image. Um, and if you are listening to this Zoom and you have a drone, please get in touch with the museum. I was driving away the last day of install, and someone was flying a drone around the banners that I had just put up. And I drove around the neighborhood trying to figure out who was doing it, and I couldn't find the operator. But if you know who they were, or if it wasn't you, but you have a drone and would be willing to take some pictures for us, that would be amazing.
One of our board members does.
Oh,
One
great.
of us needs to get in touch with Jim after this call. I'm writing a note.
Awesome. Those are my ideas so far.
Somebody else, George, asked, great project. Can you use it for student education? It's very visual.
That's a great
Uh,
idea.
touch a truck. I think.
Those are very little students. Yeah, I think it could be a great project for that. It could be used later if I can get a good photo, and I'd be happy to talk to Lynne about, making it part of the field trip curriculum.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's almost 8 o'clock. I think we've got through a lot of these questions. We sent out an email today to remind you guys about this event tonight, but we'll definitely be in touch about the artists' reception later in the month. And we hope that you'll come by and see it. If you like it, send me an email, let us know, because we'd love to hear your impressions when you see it in real life, too. It's definitely even in the e-blast I sent out, I didn't include like a direct photo of it because it's larger than life and you really do need to see it in person. So I encourage you all to come over during October. All right, well, thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you guys around.
Thank you.